A nefarious nightmare contains themes that may be explicit or triggering for some. Specific warnings and disclaimers will be mentioned in the show notes. A nefarious nightmare assumes all parties that are mentioned in these cases to be innocent unless proven guilty in a court of law. Listener discretion is strongly advised. You can help us grow the show by leaving us a 5-star written review on Apple Podcast or Spotify, or you can join our Patreon for lighthearted bonus content. With this, welcome to Season 5.
There is no such thing as tough love. Love is kind, love is compassionate, love is tender. Heather Wolf. There is no exercise better for the heart than reaching down and lifting people up. John Holmes. And empathy is the highest form of knowledge. George Eliot.
Today, we will be giving a crash course on what empathy looks like. A very brief refresher on narcissism, what victim blaming is, and then we will be hearing from KATI, who is a close friend of Grace from Minding the Beehive series. This is phase 2 of our series, where we have discussions with a few of the survivors from that series, and we will be discussing and rehashing what sexual assault and consent is. With that, I'm Amanda Cronin.
And I'm Courtney Fenner. And A Nefarious Nightmare presents Still Minding the Beehive, Surviving Sex Crimes, Part 5.
Empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of others. It involves putting ourselves in someone else's shoes and experiencing their emotions. By being empathetic, we can connect with others on a deeper level and show them that we care. Empathy is not just about feeling sorry for someone's plight. It's not a pity party. No, it's about truly understanding their perspective and offering support. It is an important skill to have in both personal and professional relationships, as it allows us to build trust and foster positive connections with others. Empathy can also lead to greater compassion and kindness, as we become more aware of the struggles and challenges that others face. Overall, empathy is a fundamental aspect of being human and plays a crucial role in creating a more compassionate and understanding society.
When we talk about narcissism, we discuss how narcissists lack empathy. Now, we aren't saying that people who lack empathy are narcissists. After all, it is possible to not have empathy in certain situations or with certain people. We all are human and we all have a certain polarity to it after all. We all have, a yin and a yang to us. It's just that while we all have empathy and apathy, some of us just have more of one than the other.
Why would she do something like this? Good girls aren't supposed to do stuff like this. Who's going to want to date her now? Who's going to want to marry her? What if her kids see this stuff later? Did she not think about any of them? This is all her fault.
Drunk women do drunk things. She had it coming. She was asking for it.
I didn't know you were like that. What did you think was going to happen? When you act like a slut, you're going to get treated like a slut.
If you weren't asking for things like this to happen, you wouldn't put photos like that all over the internet. You know this is your fault, right?
She just regrets it because she got caught. This is all just for attention. And she should have known better than to take a picture like that. This is kind of her fault.
What you did and how you acted, oh my gosh, so much like a whore, so much like a slut. Oh my goodness. You should be so disgusted with yourself, so disappointed. Whose fault is that but your own? You need to get your life together. Yeah, it's funny, obviously.
Victim blaming is both awful and extremely unhelpful, unwarranted and disrespectful because it perpetuates a culture of victimization and injustice. It shifts the blame from the perpetrator to the victim, undermining their credibility and discouraging them from seeking justice. This harmful practice also reinforces horrible stereotypes and stigmatizes survivors, further marginalizing them in society. Victim blaming fails to hold perpetrators accountable for their actions and instead places the burden on the victim to prevent their own victimization. It is very important to challenge victim blaming and shaming, instead focusing on addressing the root causes of violence and supporting survivors in their journey towards healing and justice. Practicing empathy is a very good start to avoiding victim blame or shame.
We've said it a few times, but no matter what someone may or may not have done, said, or even worn in the past, or the day they were sexually assaulted, they were still victims of a horrific crime. They often do enough blaming and shaming on their own, so when they have others doing it, it not only necessitates in their own mind that they were right for feeling ashamed, but it has them questioning everything they do or mask how they should act. It's just a downward spiral that they do not need to experience. In any essence, if you have been guilty of victim blaming or shaming and are listening right now, we urge you to start practicing empathy. Because at the end of the day, if all of this happened to you, it wouldn't feel good to hear about the negative, unhelpful, and unnecessary things other victim blamers and shamers say. Be the better person. We say that with love.
With all of this in mind, let's talk about consent. Consent is a crucial aspect of any interaction involving individuals. It refers to the voluntary agreement or permission given by one person to another for a particular action, such as sex, or activity, such as sex. Consent can be given verbally, in writing, or through nonverbal cues such as body language. It is important to note that consent must be freely given without any form of coercion or manipulation. This includes not taking advantage of someone who is inebriated, or if someone says, "I think we should stop," or if a person is very obviously uncomfortable. In a potentially sexual situation, if the answer isn't yes, then always assume it's a no until the person is of a completely sound and sober mind frame. It should also be informed, meaning that the person giving consent fully understands the nature and implications of what they are consenting to. Additionally, consent is revocable, meaning that a person has the right to withdraw their consent at any time. For example, if you listen back to Exit the Cultiverse, which was my episode, there was a point where I was complicit in the sex at first, but then I kept saying, "Stop, it hurts." This means that originally, consent was given, but then I revoked it. Unfortunately, the fact that it was revoked was not respected, and it led to what we consider to be a sexual assault. Respect for consent is essential in maintaining healthy and respectful relationships, both personal and professional. It is an integral part of ensuring autonomy, bodily integrity, and personal boundaries.
Did you know that sexual violence is a distressing issue that affects millions of Americans? According to RAINN.org, it occurs every 68 seconds, which is truly alarming. Unfortunately, younger people are at a higher risk for experiencing sexual violence, especially those between the ages of 12 and 34. It's important to note that 82% of minor victims are female, while 90% of adult victims are also female. These statistics highlight the disproportionate impact on women. After all, sexual assault does a pretty tremendous job at stealing the victims' livelihoods, traumatizing them for years to come and even for the rest of their lives.
Now let's delve a little deeper into the data, shall we? Women between the ages of 18 and 24 who are college students are 3 times more likely to experience sexual violence compared to women in general. This is a concerning trend that needs our attention. Additionally, females of the same age who are not enrolled in college are 4 times more likely to face sexual violence. These numbers emphasize the vulnerability of young women and the urgent need for support and prevention measures.
Back in Season 2, we heard from Parthenia Grace on Part 2, Minding the Beehive series. Grace was very obviously shaken up and traumatized by her experience. She also was another spearhead in that entire Beehive movement that we are fortunate to be a part of. In fact, her awareness posts, kindness, and pure love and humor have been a major player in bringing these women together. to survive in harmony and have support system to protect and watch out for one another. In this entire process, her friend KATI has been nothing but essential in this, where she has been their advocate and friend. KATI is an amazing person and wanted to talk a bit about advocacy and empathy, because as you all will hear from her today, quoted directly from her, they don't teach empathy in school, end quote. So now that we have given you a crash course on empathy, apathy, a refresher on narcissism, victim blaming and shaming, consent, and sexual assault, we would like to introduce you to our friend KATI.
My name is KATI. I am 30 years old. I am currently living in Tucson, Arizona. I am currently in the HR space, and I really like to do thrifting and video games for fun. So I was actually Facebook friends with AV back in like 2014, 2015. And I always observed his Facebook profile as kind of this larger than life, exaggerated caricature of kind of that scene emo type of alternative trend that we saw back in, the late 2000s. And didn't think anything of it. Always thought, this is something to kind of go, whoa, like really kind of a very extreme type of role. But it wasn't until in 2021 that an acquaintance of mine from high school, her name is Grace, had reached out to me and said, hey, do you know this individual personally? And I was nervous because I wasn't sure on what was going to unfold. But when she started sharing with me on what had happened the night before, I was horrified to know that this person had taken the time to gain her trust all in a span of a day, gain her trust, love bomb her, kind of start using pet names in order to essentially lure her into his apartment and essentially assault her at that point. And it's crazy to think that this person who was an acquaintance of mine, I only had hung out with her a handful of times, if that, had come to me and shared something so personal with me that I knew automatically that I needed to find a way to be able to support her moving forward. So essentially, from my understanding, from Grace, after he had assaulted Grace, he was still on social media, still doing his thing. And essentially for the next year, he was living his life the same way he was, going on Facebook, finding women, going on dating apps, finding women. And it wasn't until 2022 that Grace had connected with Holly on a sexual assault survivor group. And it was crazy to think that someone from Arizona could go to Maryland and then finding out, he had previously been in Washington, and essentially brainwash these women and ultimately hurt them both, like mentally, sexually, physically, and just went from there. And so from that year, the year up until his arrest, again, was popping on social media here and there, having his post released of, what he had done, because the girls decided to take it upon themselves that this can't happen again. And it started from, posting originally from just 7 victims, 220, 230, 240, and now it's in the 50s at this point in 2023. And having him, going in and out of social media, saying that he didn't do what he had done, having his family involved, actively, saying that he didn't do the things that he did, and ultimately trying to oppress these women, but also trying to fear or make these women fear for their lives by saying that he was taking legal action against them, that they were, doing cease and desist, but they weren't going through the legal actions to do this. But it was all to say it, so it was a fear tactic, essentially. I mean, I think I was in utter shock because it wasn't his first arrest that we experienced this. It was his second arrest and being extradited back to Maryland, in a place that, Maryland is or Baltimore in general is a high crime area. So being able to see him be set free and to go back to doing what he has always been doing back in Tucson was just so devastating, because it just felt like our justice system really just disappointed not just me, but for the rest of the women that have been affected by him, and even the women that haven't been brave enough to speak up for their cases, because it's not just, it's not just the case of the 2 cases that are happening right now. These cases represent all of the women that were impacted by him. And so seeing so much, turmoil and being, just distraught over knowing that this person gets set free when there are other people out there that don't receive the same treatment. It's really a privilege that he receives that I don't think others really receive that privilege. We had talked briefly. He had messaged me out of the blue, and I thought it was very strange. It was back in 2018, and he, tried to act like we were friends, and I was like, I've never met you before. And he's like, oh, you haven't? Oh, okay. And tried to create a conversation, and realizing now, like looking back at those messages, if I would have continued that conversation, I know that I could have been one of those girls.
At this point in the interview, I asked KATI if she felt that there was some sort of connection between men who randomly send unsolicited DMs that include the famous dick pic, for example, and sexual assault. I ask this because I've seen myself a connection between those who have been victimized in sex crimes and those assailants sending those unsolicited messages. I had wondered if it was a form of targeting or grooming a potential victim.
Yeah, and I completely agree. I think most of these men that will reach out, or at least in my experience, you can tell the time frame, the time of day that they're reaching out. It seems like they're lonely. In the time frame of one of the times he attempted to reach out, I had now connected it with he had just gone through a breakup. And I think a lot of times these people are trying to find that connection with people, whereas it's not organic. It's an ultimate red flag. You're only coming in saying hi. You're not coming in with, oh, I noticed on Facebook that you really like video games. What type of video games do you like? Or interacting in a more natural way, that reaching out, just saying hi, or just, say, oh, it's been a while since I've seen you, like he did, that it's kind of a red flag, and it's in your gut of, whoa, this is not quite right. It's disingenuine, for sure. I became very, very close with Grace, and we created, kind of cynically, created this really good friendship. And even before, Grace is such a kind-hearted, biggest heart that I've ever seen, but also just a sweet person. And so I guess it's kind of a messed up way of finding a friendship, right? Of, bonding over something that is so traumatic, but we became very close, and, talking more than just this traumatic event that happened in her life, that when we ended up finding the hive, and her sharing with me of, it's not just happened to me, it's happened to multiple other women in multiple other states, that when I was sharing, my support to her, she realized that I may be a benefit to not just her, but to these other women that didn't have this support system. And so I was included in their group, and it kind of seemed a little weird at first because, they all had one commonality, and I was kind of the odd one out of, I had never experienced Adrian in person. I had never been victimized by Adrian in person, or not in person, but victimized by Adrian in general. That it felt very weird. I'll be honest, but over time, after, sharing my input about saying, hey, this is not the end. It seems like it's just right around the corner that we're going to find that justice. Over time, we had created a relationship where now I provide support to them in other ways than just one of, if let's say someone is having a bad day, they reach out to me and say, hey, what should I do? I know that I can be able to lean on them as well. And it's created more than just, a support system over this, person. It's kind of created a support system for anything else that's happening in our day-to-day lives.
At this point in the interview, I had asked KATI if she had ever thought about looking into victim advocacy as a career, since she does come from an HR standpoint as well as being an advocate for a close friend of hers. Along with this, I asked her if she agreed that there is a link to sexual assailants and past traumas as well as narcissistic personality disorder.
For me personally, I have a degree in psychology, so I have looked at getting a master's in kind of therapy in general. I know a few of the other girls have looked into victim advocacy, but I know that I've kind of looked more in the direction of being, a therapist of some sort. So in my degree, it was kind of more of the basics in terms of psychology. So just not even being a certified therapist, you can see that there was a lot of traumatic stuff that has happened as a child, and even other predators. Like, for example, R. Kelly is the prime example that I see. If you look at R. Kelly's background, he was abused as a child. And so knowing that a lot of times, I can only imagine that there was some trauma that is there that definitely kind of trickles into adulthood for Adrian. But also in terms of narcissism, when we're even just talking about it on a day-to-day basis, I definitely think there are traits that really do scream narcissist, but I think that there's so much more that's woven into his psyche that definitely having someone who is licensed looking into it, I think it would be very imperative.
I wanted to know how the series has helped her, how it's helped survivors of Adrian Vildusea, for example, and how it can help other women who have been victimized. I had also related to her in the fact that being an advocate is a rewarding feeling.
Yeah, I think that it's helped me a lot on figuring out on how to be able to help others, because it's not just one person that I'm talking to, it's multiple people. And so being able to help others, I think, is finding a way to help each person in their own personal way has been very important. I know for me, there have been times where I have to remove myself because, again, it's either it's too much or it's just a lot going on in terms of my day-to-day, and I'm needing to focus on, work, my personal life. But I think that it has taught me the value of, it's not a one size fits all in terms of helping people. Finding your own individual way ultimately ends up helping, the person that you're helping, but helps you as a whole on how to be able to making those kinds of changes to ultimately be successful in terms of helping others. I've listened to the entire series. And even not listening to the entire series, but sharing the story and sharing on how I'm a part of it or this and that. A lot of people I guess it's more so that they can't wrap their head around how this person goes about doing this. And because if you think about it, like, how does this person have essentially a Rolodex of people that while they're talking to this one person, they're also talking to another person. And so it goes into play of, well, wait a minute, why did they come over? And, why did they bring alcohol? Why did, they go over to his place? Didn't you think it was weird that he started calling you pet names? And it's very it's disempowering to people. And especially for victims are already trying to justify what he did and saying, I deserve this. And I mean, even for example, I had created a post on a Facebook group that I've told you about, essentially providing women kind of a warning of what men are doing out there, whether it's cheating, whether it's assault, whether, they are essentially, criminals. And when I had a few people reach out saying, I have been victimized by Adrian, and reaching out to them and asking them for their story and saying, hey, you don't need to provide me every detail if you don't feel comfortable. I just need to know on the time frame and what happened. But essentially going back of when I had talked to some of these women and shared, it's a safe space. I'm so sorry of what happened to you. I know that sometimes reliving this can be very painful, or sharing your story is equivalent to being reliving it. But as long as you tell me on the time frame that it happened, that's all that matters to me, because I want to make sure that your voice is heard. And I'm more than happy to tell you on where we are currently at right now, because I realize that sharing what's going on for them made them more comfortable in sharing their story. But a lot of times when these women are recounting their tale, a lot of them went, well, I know I shouldn't have been on this app, or I know I was in a vulnerable place at this time. But I had to share with them, it doesn't matter on if you were not supposed to be on this app, or if you were in a vulnerable place. He knew better. He knew so much better, because for one of them, they were a minor. He was an adult. He knew better than to take advantage of this person, say, I will be your friend and I'll be your confidant and I will essentially treat you as if you are an adult. He knew so much better than, these people that were just taken advantage of. And I don't think people realize that when people are assaulted, they are coming up with those stories on why it is justified for that to happen to them, when really they need to be told the opposite on that was not okay what happened to you. And it doesn't matter what story you're playing in your head, it was still messed up. It doesn't matter on X, Y, and Z. It doesn't matter, on what you were wearing, or, let's say it was consensual at first and then it turned unconsensual. It was still assault. And that's the most important part.
Prior to the interview, KATI had reached out and said that she really wanted to talk about empathy, being that it is not something that is taught as a class in school. And I wanted to follow up with a question on how she felt about those people who victim blame. Before we hear from her, I want to make it crystal clear that victim blaming and shaming can harm both the victim and the ongoing cases that they pursue. It has the potential to spread misinformation, to cause law enforcement to not take things seriously, and put innocent people in a less than flattering light. While the unfortunate truth is that we see it happen regardless of speaking out about it, we want everyone listening to know that victim blaming and shaming is absolutely wrong, harmful, and unethical. We want to urge everyone to always fill the shoes of those who tell their story. Would you blame yourself if you found yourself in a position of being assaulted or even murdered? For example, many victims of Ted Bundy, as much as we don't like mentioning his name, did not know of his intent or even ask for him to kill them. You can spot red flags a mile away sometimes, and in this case, it would have been difficult to do so at first, because the truth is, since so many had found him to be attractive and normal, which, by the way, in case any of you didn't know, they've done scientific studies on how a face might look more trustworthy, being that it would be considered to be more attractive or even normal looking, but I digress. But they trusted him, and he gave no implication of being something more sinister. Did any of his victims ask for this? No, they did not. So blaming and shaming really doesn't help anyone. It doesn't even remotely contribute to anything except for the potential to harm. I always say, and will continue to say, that just because you might wear a shorter than usual skirt one evening while out on a date doesn't mean that you consent to others doing whatever the fuck they want with you. And I definitely want to add here that victims and survivors often do enough of the wrongful blaming of themselves and self-degradation. We don't need to add to that. We instead need to encourage them and ask them how we can help them.
Yeah, agreed. And I think the people that victim blame, at times, not all of them, but some of them, it's just because they would never do it themselves. And I think it's just so mind-blowing. And for me, it's mind-blowing. I mean, looking at a picture of him, you wouldn't think for 5 seconds that, this person could be, Mr. Casanova. But, I think a lot of times people just go, I would never do that. So like, I can't fathom it. So that's why they do, or they ask discrediting things, because they can't fathom it. And I mean, I can't fathom of people, assaulting other women, but I can't fathom people, murdering people as well. But it happens. You'll always say those types of things until it happens to you. And then once it happens to you, you will never, ever go, well, what if you did this or that, until it happens to you. And, I would never wish that upon that, or never wish that upon somebody to have that happen to them. But sometimes you'll never understand until it happens to you. So empathy, and it's funny because I told you in the beginning of all of our conversations, is it's not taught about in school. And it's something that obviously has to be learned. It's not, nature in terms of it, because nature wise, we are taught to be selfish and we are taught to, fend for ourselves. But empathy is or emotional intelligence is a new venture for people that they can't really comprehend. And I've had to, in my experience and in my, industry, I've had to do classes of what empathy is like, how to be able to, give effective feedback to somebody. And empathy really is putting yourself in the other's shoes and being able to support them in a way that may differ than how you would want to be supported yourself. I think a lot of times for podcast, it's all about the theatrics, or just podcast acting. We watch reality TV show and it's all for the theatrics, and it's all for the thrill. And I think a lot of times in these cases, you have to think, so how would the family feel listening to this particular situation? How would the family feel on you saying, well, that person was loud and she got what she deserved? The family doesn't believe that. The family probably believes something entirely different. And so even in this kind of setting that we have right now, I'm even thinking, well, what would, even though, he is a predator, what would Adrian think? And what would Adrian's family think? And I know Adrian, we won't be able to reason with him, but what would his family think in this situation? And not at any point in time have I said anything, outlandish. I could over exaggerate at this point, but that loses credibility, because when you are stating facts and you are being clear and you're not, going off the handle, that is when the point is being able to get across, because you're being clear on your intentions. And even, for example, there was a situation where one of his family members was posting on Facebook and trying to coerce and trying to establish fear. And, we're all on the Facebook, comment feed, right? And we're all, essentially like keyboard warriors. But I essentially said, if you want people to stop talking about him, get him off of social media. Do not have him on these dating sites, because if you don't, he is going to continue this path of what he is currently doing. And that's not saying, what he could be, what he is, or, calling names. It's just stating the facts. And I think that once you start stating the facts and you're being very logical in your intention, that is when your point gets across, and that's when you have that established credibility. That's why it's so important that more victims need to have friends and supporters and advocates that are around them. Because for me, I can be very clear on my intentions. I do not have any emotional stake to this. And I guess that's my privilege, in that I can be able to be an outsider looking in and to be able to effectively say this is what happened and we will not have this happen again, or we will fight to have this not happen again. Whereas people that are victims, they have so much emotional ties, and again, don't want to discredit the victims, but sometimes having too much emotional ties to things, that is when, all of the emotions kind of pour out, and that's when, people start misconstruing things, and why it's so important to have advocates to be able to speak on your behalf. So if, let's say, there are some times where it's so emotionally draining for some bees where they have to step away, or they can't post, or, everything that's going on with the world nowadays. It's not just Adrian. There is so much going on with the world right now that it's too much for people, that it's good to have people that will still advocate for you when you're needing to draw back, and to continue that. I don't want to say fight, because sometimes that can be really aggressive, but that quest or that journey in order to be able to get that end result.
At this point, I had asked KATI, since this series started with Sextortion, what her thoughts were on it. I told her that I felt that sextortion and revenge porn are a form of virtual sexual assault, because no matter how these photos were retrieved, no matter where they came from, the victims behind it still did not consent. We feel that sextortion, as well as every sex crime, should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. But I really wanted to hear what her takeaway was.
And I think it's great that you're calling it a sex crime, because a lot of times we hear it as revenge porn. And sometimes some of these pictures or videos that are being sent out, it's not always because of revenge. It was, just, I want to show my buddies. And I know that's not in this circumstance, but I think it is a sex crime. And it's a shame that we do not have more laws around circulating about it. And, the law is very kind of loose-ended, where some people will say, well, we do have laws against, digital sex crimes. But then again, it's only for certain states. And if you're not in that certain state at this point of time, it's out of luck at this point. And so I share with those women, as gut-wrenching as it is and as violating as it is, reach out to law enforcement and to advocate for yourselves. Find others that have had that experience, and to be able to reach out to your state representatives to share that this is an important law that needs to be enacted, because you guys are going to be the pioneers to be able to stop these once and for all. Because unfortunately, the law does not protect us at this point, and that needs to change. That really needs to change, because one day it may happen to you, because we are so digital, and it could ruin your life. It could ruin your existence. Once it's on the internet, it is forever there, embedded. I think the important thing is to talk about the hard things. And this is something that even at the beginning, when we had initially connected, and it kind of sparked this thought for me. Talking about the hard things with your friends is super important. I think it deepens your relationship with people, but always providing that ground of how can I support you, and actually actively listening. And when I mean actively listening, not hearing what they say and trying to compute a response to be able to rebut that, but actually listening on what they have to say, and maybe even just asking, how can I support you? Because some people may want you to give them advice. Maybe some people just want you to listen. And it's hard at times to distinguish on what this person actually wants in that moment. But if you're just simply asking, how can I support you? That is just one way to be able to open the door to fully understand a person. And not only that, it just deepens the relationship that you have with this person. I know, for example, for Grace, like, I wouldn't have ever found a friendship as deep as hers, and she's one of my closest friends now, that I know that I can go to her for anything or talk to her about anything personal. And that's not something that you just grow organically with friends that are just surface level. I think having those conversations about the hard topics is ultimately how you grow a relationship And know, if someone's coming to you and they're somebody that is not very close, or even somebody who's close and saying, hey, this happened to me, believe them. Don't start asking a trillion questions. I think just starting with, how can I support you, is going to be the most important one. I really hope that people can be able to listen, and on the victim side, no, you're not alone. Unfortunately, you're never alone. But being able to know that there are so many avenues of support, even if it's not within your current friend group, going online, going on Facebook, going on Google, going even on YouTube. YouTube is my best friend. And being able to type those things about what you're currently feeling is a great way to be able to start finding the way to get support. And it's not expensive. It's easy as just finding that search engine, because I think a lot of times the cost of things can really scare people, especially when it comes to therapy, which is a totally different subject. But on the other side, being more so as a bystander, I hope that bystanders can be able to listen to this episode and listen to the series in general, and being able to know on how to be more empathetic and how to be able to support people in crises, I think is going to make all the difference. Because again, we don't learn on how to be able to take care of others, but I think going one step in the direction, or in the right direction, to support is going to make all the difference in the world. And again, it's a domino effect. If one person helps this way, it's going to be a domino effect of how people can treat others in the future.
It is crucial that we come together as a society to address these issues and create a safe environment for everyone. By raising awareness, providing resources, practicing empathy, and supporting survivors, we can make a positive impact and work towards a future free from sexual violence. Remember, every action counts, no matter how small, in making a difference.
If you or someone you know has been a victim of sexual assault and needs assistance, please do not hesitate to reach out. You can visit RAINN.org or call 800-656-4673 for support. It's important to note that mandatory reporting laws differ from state to state. To be on the safe side, it is best to assume that all states have these laws in place. In many cases, you may have a limited window of 24 hours to report the incident after becoming aware of it. Failure to do so could result in a misdemeanor offense and a $500 fine. If you have evidence suggesting that a minor is being sexually abused, please contact your local sexual abuse reporting hotline. We will make sure to include all of these resources in our show notes. Remember, you are not alone, and help is available.
KATI is a bee. She is in fact a soldier bee, a watcher bee, if you will. While she's not a survivor of any of the offenders we have discussed, she's advocating on their behalf, showing her kindness, and helping to raise awareness on issues like this for other bees to protect themselves. We must protect bees at all costs. We need bees to survive and thrive on this planet, so without bees, we are doomed. So, be vigilant, for when you mess with the bees,
you get the hive.
Thank you for listening to A Nefarious Nightmare. Music used in the theme was originally by Ghost Stories Incorporated, remixed by Ryan RCX Murphy. Additional background music is provided by Epidemic Sound. A Nefarious Nightmare is scripted, researched, and produced by Courtney Fenner and Amanda Cronin. I'm Lainey Hobbs, and as always, be vigilant, for when you mess with the bees, you get the hive.